In the first set of 3 videos, we did about as much as we could with the bottom half of the plant tree, up to the split between the manilophytes, which are the ferns and the horsetails, and the seed plants, which will be the subject of this video. My goal here will be to put some faces on the names, kind of like what we did with the first video with the non-plants that I was finding in my pool. But now, since we're not talking about algae anymore, I should do better about giving you real names for the plants we showcase. That was pretty embarrassing in the pond water video. Now, to keep things relatively tight, I'm going to restrict myself to things that we actually do see on Maricosta's Oceanside campus. In fact, I made a trip down to school to film most of the video clips that I'm including here. It's basically the same plant walk that the class gets when we have our class in person. I only cheated a little. I used a couple of plants from my yard. Now, to the extent that's possible, I would like to cover the main clades of seed plants, both in the gymnosperms and the angiosperms. And I'm hoping that you'll be motivated to record your own plant walk and post it on our discussion board. I'm not going to require this. I'm not going to make it an assignment. But it would be a great way for you to make a live experience to match this virtual one that you'll have with this video. Your goal could be to find plants from each of the major clades. Yeah? Okay, so we'll start just by identifying the main clades of seed plants and the respective breakdowns. There are going to be a few names, but hopefully many of these will have representative plants that you know, so the onus of having to learn new names and organisms that you've never heard of before, it won't be too great. It won't be like, yeah, the basal eukaryotes. I know about that, right? And so let's start with the gymnosperms. The Cycadophyta, cycads, Ginkgophyta, Ginkgo biloba, and Coniferophyta, the conifers. All three are represented in our plant walk. Let's do it. Yeah, we're back at the Costa. This is pretty much my day to come and do a botany walk. And we're going to start out with the pine tree. Behold, the pine tree. And so you're probably familiar with what pine trees look like, and you know that pine trees have cones. Yeah, no big surprise there. But did you know that there are 2 different sexes of cones? Because these guys here are also pine cones. They're modified branches. These are the staminate cones, or the male cones. These are the ones that will be producing copious quantities of pollen during the spring, right? The other kind of cone that we'll see are the female cones, and here. Okay, so right there is a female cone that was really a small thing at the beginning of the season. It's grown out to roughly the size of my thumbnail, okay? A little bit bigger than my thumbnail. By the end of the season, it's now October, right? And so from roughly April to October, you have the growth of a female pine cone. It's been pollinated, the seeds are developing on the inside. That pine cone is not going to be releasing seeds until it gets to be bigger, right? If we go backwards on this branch, that's not a good branch, but if you take a typical branch that actually has pine cones, they trim this tree back, so it's kind of hard for me to demonstrate what I need to demonstrate. Let's go back over here. Oh, this is a great one. So yeah, outstanding. So as you can see, the very tip of the tree, we've got some pine cones that were produced this year. All this growth is growth from last year, and that's a pine cone from probably last spring. Okay? It's grown to that size. It's still green. It's not close to being mature. If we go back on the branch a little bit further, we get to some more pine cones that are brown. Those are from 2 years ago, but they're still not open, right? They're still kind of slammed shut. And a year earlier, they're still closed, and looks like it takes about 4 years for the pine cones, the female pine cones, to open. And when they open, the seeds fall out from the spaces in between those bracts in between those little shingle-like things. Okay, I'm going to see if I can pull a pine cone off and show you the seeds. Okay, there you go. I was able to get the pine cone. This is a female pine cone. Each of these little shingles on the pine cone, each little bract, is actually a side branch. The main stem, the central axis, is the one that goes right at the middle of the pine cone, and these are side branches, and the seeds are born on the inside of them. So I can actually see there are a couple of seeds right here, right? So I'm going to take those seeds out and I'll show you what they look like. All right, so I got a seed out of this thing. Took a while, but I was able to get one. I just want to show you what happens. Basically, this pine cone sits on the tree. It sits on the tree, and on a windy day, it's going to release the seeds, and the seeds, as they fall, I'll show that to you again. I don't know if you saw that. It kind of spins down. It twirls down like a little helicopter, lands on the ground. That's a pretty standard thing for wind dispersed seeds. Most temperate trees have wind dispersed seeds, and by falling down slowly, kind of that helicopter action, it actually increases the distance that the wind will be able to carry that seed away from the parent plant. Okay, so that's the seeds of the pine cone. These male cones, they don't look like much now. They never really look like much, but they carry huge amounts of pollen during the spring. Okay, so when you look at the pine tree, you've got female cones and male cones on the same tree. That would make a pine tree monoecious. Remember that term? We used that term when we talked about the fern gametophytes. Only in this case, the monoece is applied to the sporophytic stage. Remember, the pine tree is a sporophyte, and the difference here, even though they're both monoecious, is that you're not going to ever get that same possibility of intragametophytic self-fertilization like we did in the case of the monoecious fern gametophyte. That's because we never actually have a hermaphroditic gametophyte. Okay? The gametophytes, if you remember, are either the ovules that are inside of the female cones, or they're the pollen grains. And a pollen grain is not going to make a seed with another pollen grain, right? And so you have to have a male gametophyte, a pollen grain, fertilizing an ovule that's there inside of one of these female cones, and consequently you end up with a zygote, which is then going to grow into the seed, actually the embryo of the seed. All right. Monoece is a characteristic of pine trees. Most pines are monoecious, but there are plenty of conifers that are dioecious. A dioecious plant would be one in which you've got male trees and female trees. Male trees are only going to be producing pollen grains, and the female trees will produce no pollen grains and produce only ovules, okay, or female gametophytes. Okay? And so right over there, okay, across the way, we're looking at some juniper trees. And junipers are also conifers, but they are dioecious plants. Okay, so we'll be looking over at them next. So looking through the junipers, they trim these guys way up. Okay, unfortunately, that's good for passage of vehicles and people underneath, but it's really bad for botany walks because we don't get to see any of the reproductive structures. Now, you probably know that junipers have berries. They're not really berries; those are the female cones. And juniper berries are produced by female juniper trees. Male trees don't produce any juniper berries; they produce only the male cones. Junipers, if you come across junipers in landscaping, the chances are pretty good that it will be a female, and the reason for that is that male junipers can produce such huge quantities of pollen that they pretty much make a mess on top of anything that passes close by. These trees are females. I can see if I can zoom in on this. There actually is a berry like right here. Let's see, where is it? Where to go? Okay, I'm zoomed in as much as I can get, and I'm presuming that the berry is actually there. Yeah, okay, so now I can see it. It's like right in the middle of the screen. I'll zoom in on that when I get into the editing room. All right, and so that's a juniper berry. It's a female cone. This is a female juniper tree. Like good landscapers, the people that set up the landscaping at Maricosta planted several juniper trees. Zoom out. Okay. Several actual trees were planted. The ones that were females were kept. The ones that were males were mowed down by chainsaw, which is a standard practice, again, because you don't want that pollen cloud falling on top of people's heads as they're walking underneath the trees during the springtime. Any questions? Haha, I know you can't really ask them because I'm on a video. But our next stop is going to be looking at more gymnosperms. This was our stop for the conifers, Coniferophyta. Okay, so here are ginkgo tree number 1, ginkgo tree number 2, past the white truck. Ginkgo tree number 1 is a male. This is another dioecious plant. And if you come in the springtime, it'll have the male cones. The male cones will be producing lots of pollen. Again, it's October now, so the leaves are starting to turn color. And there might be some remnants of male cones. If I can find some, I'll show them to you. But if not, you'll just have to take my word that these guys have structures that look a whole lot like those staminate cones that we saw in the pine tree. I don't see any, so we're going to have to skip that. And just come on back in the spring. If you're on campus, come and visit this tree. It will be producing lots of male staminate cones in the springtime, if it's still alive. Looks like a bigger portion of the tree is dead, so I hope this tree is still going to be with us for the next few years. Okay, and over here we've got the female tree, and the female tree is pretty spectacular. It's not very common for us to even have female ginkgos because there's definitely another case of sex discrimination against female trees, and the reason for that is that these guys are producing these really shriveled up cherry-like things, and they've got a really characteristic odor. And so if you're a brave person like this person who parked their car underneath a female ginkgo tree, either you do that because you don't know that these things might be dropping hell cherries onto your car, or because you actually like the smell. Okay? And so we don't have to go up, I don't have to reach up and grab any of these because there's some on the ground. I can go ahead and show you what these guys look like. And it's kind of soft, it's gushy, and it's got a pulp and a seed in the middle, and go ahead and smell that. Okay? Yeah, smells somewhere like somewhere between really old cheese and dog vomit. Okay, not something that's particularly appealing to most people, but after a while, you kind of get used to it, right? I'm gonna eat this. Yeah, right. Just kidding. Okay, so the story about ginkgo trees is that they are the only species, Ginkgo biloba is the only species known from the whole phylum Ginkgophyta. There have been ginkgos in the past. We know about them from the fossil record, but they're just not they're not around anymore, with one exception, Ginkgo biloba. A pretty important plant, both in Asian literature. There's legends about goddesses and fairies that fly to the ground on a ginkgo leaf. The seeds, the seeds are used in Chinese medicine. Ginkgo biloba, the supplement used in Western cultures, is actually extracted from the leaves, and so it's a different part of the ginkgo tree that's used by Western herbal medicine relative to what it's used in traditional Chinese medicine. Okay, so that's Ginkgo biloba, a representative of the Ginkgo phyta. Okay, so to the non-informed, this plant looks vaguely palm-like. Okay, no, it doesn't look palm-like at all. You have to convince yourself of that. It looks more fern-like than palm-like. That's a characteristic of the cycads. I mean, yeah, superficially you might be confusing it with a fern or a palm, but it definitely is a seed plant. Its name, this one is the Madagascar sago. If we look inside, actually, those are not the seeds at all. But the look of this plant is, well, it's kind of hard to see on this one because it's been trimmed back so that it hardly looks cycad-ish. It really does, has been trimmed to make it look more like a palm, which is misleading and I think kind of criminal. Okay, but at some point or another, you're going to realize that as a biologist, you need to know the difference between a palm and a cycad. Palm trees are flowering plants, they're in the monocots. Cycads are non-flowering plants, they're gymnosperms in the cycadophyta. This one is kind of exotic, and I have to admit, I'm terribly disappointed because over in that spot right there, there used to be another beautiful cycad that they somehow found the wisdom to remove, and I'm not terribly happy about that. I don't know where they put it, but it's not there anymore. There is a Cycas revoluta down below, and I hope it's still there. I'm going to go down and look right now. And yes, in fact, the Cycas revoluta is still there. And what's neat about this one is that it's actually you see that big mass of orange stuff in the middle? That is the female cone. That's the ovulate cone of Cycas revoluta. It's going to open up. It's going to be receptive to pollen, probably pollen produced by other cycads that are in the area, right? Thing about cycads and ginkgos is that their pollen is different from the pollen of conifers and meadophytes and flowering plants. They actually release a sperm. Okay? The pollen grains are taken into a pollen chamber, and a flagellated sperm is released. These are the seed plants that do not have pollen tubes. The other kinds of seed plants that I talked about before, they have pollen tubes that deliver the sperm nucleus directly to the egg nucleus. These guys don't do it. The sperm is actually retaining that ancestral characteristic of having either flagella or cilia, and they swim. They don't have to swim very far. They swim a very short distance from where they're released from the pollen grain to get to the egg where fertilization takes place. Okay. I see there's another cycad over there, and so we're going to go take a look at it. Right. All right, and here we are looking at another Cycas revoluta. This one is cool because it's a male. It's not going to be producing a staminate cone this year. That staminate cone you're looking at is the cone that was produced last year. It's the same species as the Cycas revoluta that we saw before. If you look at the stuff that's right in the middle of the cone, those aren't cones. That's not cones coming. That's basically more leaves that are being produced. They're going to grow out and they'll produce a flush of these bright green fern-like fronds, and that's going to be the next year's growth. All right? Cycas revoluta. In fact, if you look down below, there's a cone from a couple of years ago, right? So last year's cone, cones from 2 years ago, and the growth that's coming up for this year. As I said, cycads, ginkgos, and conifers. The fourth gymnosperm clade is the Cnidophyta, and it's worth detailing because they're somewhat significant in our lecture discussions, particularly when it comes to the question of angiosperm origins. In other words, I don't have any plant to show you, but I don't want to skip it either. So I have this good friend, his name is Mike, and he's currently a Chinese medicine practitioner in New York City. and for a while he was encouraging me to grow Ephedra sinensis for him. Its Chinese name is Ma Huang, and apparently it's good for a lot of different things in traditional Chinese medicine. It's also kind of illegal in the United States because when it was widely used as an herbal supplement here, it caused a lot of death in the 1990s and early 2000s. Most famously, there was a pitcher on the Baltimore Orioles. Now, ephedra's primary active chemical is ephedrine, an amphetamine, and apparently there's plenty of it in the plant tissues, enough to cause a speed overdose in some of its users. So Mikey wanted a supply of high-grade mahuang, and Jeff lives in a zone where it should grow just fine. Unfortunately, I could never get the seedlings to live, so my second career as a supplier of raw materials to herbalists and meth labs never got off the ground. Ephedra sinensis wouldn't grow for me, but the closely related Ephedra nevadensis is pretty easy to find in local deserts. You could get some with the drive just past Julian. Look for the plant known as Mormon tea. So whether you're an herbal medicine practitioner, a dieter, or weightlifter trying to drop body fat, or maybe an LDS faithful looking for a fix, this is a neophyte that actually touches your life in a meaningful way. And that's all that I'm going to say about the neophyta. All of the gymnosperms are together as their own clade of seed plants, and the other lineage is the one leading to the angiosperms, aka flowering plants. Now, in the flowering plants, there are three big clades forming the vast majority of the angiosperms, but basal to those clades splitting, there are three basal branches: Ambarella trichopoda, the nymphaeales, and the austrobaleales. I could skip over these plants entirely because I actually touch on them in the lecture videos. But as things turn out, I have a water lily growing in my swimming pool, so I'll actually get to show you some of the primitive traits on this plant. Okay, so I'm on my belly in front of my pool, and I wanted to share with you this guy. Oh. Yes, a water lily. And the thing that I wanted to point out here, first of all, we never got a chance to see the magnolia flower, but the thing I was going to point out there is that there's no regular pattern of having like 5 sepals and 5 petals. That's just not there in the case of a lot of the basal angiosperms, including magnolias. Magnolia trees don't have any particular number of petals or flowers, petals or sepals on their flowers. Right? Water lilies are even more basal compared to the magnoliids, and so it also has no regular pattern of the number of petals or sepals. It has no regular pattern as the number of whorls of stamens. And the other thing about these guys is that when you look at the stamens, the individual stamens, right down there. Okay, they are flat. Okay, they're flat at the base. They do taper up a little bit, but you can definitely see that from the water lily, it's not too difficult to envision these stamens as being modified leaves in the same way that the petals are modified leaves. In fact, the petals are almost the same morphology as the stamens. The difference is that the stamens are shorter and thinner, they're yellow at the base, and they have an anther at the tip, right? They have the pollen-bearing structure at the tip. You can't see it in the middle of the flower. There's once the remainder of the stamens open up, there should be the female part, the pistil of the flower. But I don't have any other water lilies to show that to you with here. So that's all that we're going to be seeing with our water lily. Okay, now on to the 3 big clades. First, there's the Magnoliidae, And yes, there are two eyes in a row. We call these plants magnoliids, and one member is, not surprisingly, the magnolia tree. Other magnoliids include avocado, bay laurel, black pepper, and as it turns out, I happen to have an avocado tree that I can show you right after I show you the Aristolochia. Okay, so now we're walking down into the parking lot near the bottom of the horticulture area, and I want to show you one plant that people are probably not terribly appreciative of, but I like it. This is an example from the Magnoliidae, right? This is the group that includes magnolias and avocado and bay laurel, black pepper, and in the Piperales, which is a black pepper group, these are mostly vine plants. But in that group, we've got kind of a characteristic plant. It's called the Dutchman's pipe, or Aristolochia. And these bladder-like things are the flowers of Aristolochia, right? So yeah, this whole thing, it's supposed to look, it's supposed to kind of look like a pipe, right? There's a stem of the pipe on the right-hand side, and the big old bowl is where the Dutchman puts his tobacco and smokes it, I suppose, right? So Dutchman's pipe, Aristolochia. I don't know what species this is, but it is definitely. Oh, wait. Here we go. Here's some open flowers of the Aristolochia. That is pretty spectacular, right? I can zoom out and show you that. Okay, so here's that bowl. Turn it around. You got this really spectacular flower, Aristolochia, and again, that is in the Magnoliidae. These are part of the crown group of angiosperms and mesangiospermi, but they're in the Magnoliidae. They're neither monocots nor eudicots. All right, so no magnolia trees on the way home, but I decided to stop by in my front yard to show you another magnoliid. Yes, avocado, Persea. Okay, now the thing I wanted to share with you about this particular avocado, I don't have any flowers. I can't give you that to look at the flower morphology, but I can point out that from this one tree, you got these round avocados. These are reeds, like one of my very favorite avocados. And on the same tree, basically, there's only one rootstock there. I also have this other kind of avocado. You see that? Okay, so Fuerte avocados, reed avocados. One tree, two sets of avocados. How do you do that? Well, the answer is down here. There was a graft. I grafted reed avocados onto this branch. I grafted Fuerte avocados onto that branch, and that's how we ended up with two different kinds of avocados from the same tree. Now the trick is to graft, you have to match up the part of the vascular tissue that is actually still growing, the active part. Later we'll talk about the vascular cambium, which is a meristematic bit of tissue inside of right there between the xylem and the phloem. And think back to Jeff's avocado tree. This is a good example of how the vascular cambium, or understanding of vascular cambium, is a practical bit of knowledge that you might need if you ever need to propagate trees. Right. I'm noticing up here that I've got some really weird avocado. Apparently it's being squished inside between two different branches. I'm gonna have to deal with that next spring when I collect the avocados, I guess. So if you were to decide to do anything like on Google for this lab, maybe Google up angiosperms, you'll undoubtedly come up with a ton of sites that talk about dicots versus monocots, which is really an old saw that's been obsolete for over 20 years, but it's ingrained in the way that flowering plants get taught. I think it's because people are just too lazy to learn the accepted taxonomy, which is what you're getting in Bio 202. In the old picture, flowering plants as a whole were split into either dicots or monocots. And there's a whole list of differences for students to learn to distinguish them based on easy to identify traits. My mom taught monocots and dicots to her fourth grade students. Now, the truth is considerably more nuanced than this. There's no dicots. That would be a paraphyletic taxon. And we're going to dispense entirely with the old dichotomy. But one thing that we can keep from the old school is monocots. They are a good monophyletic taxon, and they have some pretty reliable characteristics that distinguish them from the rest of the angiosperms. And so I like to share this with the students in our plant walk. Now, monocots are a large and very successful group with a few taxa that stand out as being super important. The grasses, the orchids, the palms, onions, irises, bananas, lilies, taro root, ginger, true yams. If you look at the 10 most important sources of plant-based calories for the human diet, 7 of them are monocots. Truly, they feed our species more than any other kind of plant. You can identify most monocots just by looking at the leaves. Characteristically, they have parallel venation, like in a blade of grass or in the leaf of a banana. Other non-monocot flowering plants usually have reticulate venation, where the veins branch off the central rachis and branch again. Now, the second characteristic of monocots is seen in their flowers. Floral parts are generally in threes or multiples of 3 sepals and 3 petals. Often the pistil is fused out of 3 carpels, and so the fruit will also have 3 compartments when you cut it in cross-section. If you've ever used your finger to split a banana naturally, not with a knife, but the way that the banana wants to split, it breaks into 3 parts, not 2. That does make things awkward for a banana split, getting the ice cream to fit in between 3 parts, that is. Okay. Now, all of the remaining angiosperms, the non-monocots, will mostly have reticulate venation in their leaves, and their flowers will mostly have 4 or 5 repeats in their structures. This will be easy enough for us to demonstrate while we're out on our walk. All right, so here's the quiz for you. Let's take a look at this plant. Linear leaves. If the leaves are linear like this, the chances are pretty good that it's going to be have parallel venation. If you look at the veins, if you look at the leaves directly, I don't know if you can see that, but the zoom. But yeah, the veins are parallel. If you look at the flowers now, the flowers look like they have 6 petals. 3 of those, the 3 that are below, are actually sepals, and the ones above are petals. Some botanists basically say, well, they're about the same. We don't even need to distinguish them. Some people will just call them both tepals. And but either way, whether you say that there's 6 tepals or 3 sepals and 3 petals, we're looking at a 3-murus flower, and that makes this a All right. Couldn't leave without saying hello to these guys. Really pretty, right? Okay. And you look at the leaves. Yeah, reticulate venation, probably not a monocot. You look at the flowers, you've got that pentameric 5-murus structure. So yeah, plumerias in the Apocynaceae are, they're actually, these are eudicots. Eudicots are the most diverse of the flowering plants, and to be honest, that characteristic of having 5-murus structures is probably more characteristic of the eudicot than it would be for the magnoliids. Right? I'm not sure if we even have a magnolia tree on campus, but if I have a chance to find one on the way home, from the school, I will definitely drop by and we'll look at the magnolia flower. What old school botanists used to call dicots is really the collection of all the rest of the angiosperms, including eudicots, the magnoliids, and also the three basal taxa we mentioned before, Ambarella, water lilies, and the Austerbeliales. Now, is there any way of telling eudicots from the others? Well, yes, there is. If I had to do this, I would probably want to start by looking at the pollen. Eudicots have triporate pollen. Ironically, their pollen has basically the same look as monocot flowers in being three mirrous in their structure, three parts, right? Another thing you can look for is primitive-ish characteristics, like those flat stamens that I showed you earlier with the water lily. If a flower has that, then it's either a magnoliid or one of those basal angiosperms. All right, so we're still down in the horticulture area. Thought I'd share a few more plants with you. This is a queen palm. If you look at it really carefully, it's got that characteristic parallel venation. That makes it a monocot, but you already knew that because I told you it was a palm. Now, the reason why I'm pointing these plants out to you is because we've got this cool thing over here. This is an arad. Okay? If you look at the leaves, you might say, no, that doesn't look terribly like parallel venation. The veins are branching. I might be inclined to call this a eudicot, or at least not a monocot based on the leaf morphology, but this is actually a monocot. Okay? There are a number of monocots that seem to be adapted to life in the shady areas and like underneath the forest canopy, and those are among the monocots that have re-evolved broader leaves, and as having broader leaves might require, a lot of them have reverted back to reticulate venation, right? Further up the hill, we have some legit ferns. These are your basic sword ferns, and I thought this might be a good opportunity for us to look, not for any of the gametophytes. It's way too dry for gametophytes right now, but you can't see any suri here, but I'm betting that if I start looking underneath some of the fronds, we'll be looking at some suri, right? That one, no. Okay, see, no suri underneath. But now we get over here, looking carefully at these fronds, the suri are starting to develop, right? And so these little spots, those aren't sporangia. The sporangia are actually inside each sorus. And as they mature, they get darker and darker, and eventually they'll be brown and they'll be releasing tons and tons of not pollen, they'll be releasing tons and tons of spores. All right, so I'm looking through a bunch of these. A lot of them have suri underneath the fronds, but I'm not seeing any that have fully dark brown suri that will be, maybe this one. Okay. So maybe if I shake this, I'll get a little bit of yellow dust coming out now. That's the thing about these spores. If you were to shake a frond that's got lots of mature suri on them, the spores will come out, as well as the sporangia. The sporangia, if you see anything that looks like little brown specks, those are actually the sporangia. And inside each sporangium, there'll be dozens and dozens of spores. Right? The spores are so small that you can't even really see them without a microscope. So the thing that you're seeing as brown specks would be the sporangia. And if you have enough spores such that they make a visible cloud, they'll be small and yellow, and those are the spores themselves. Right? So you encounter ferns often enough where you might actually have a chance to witness this for yourself. But for the purposes of our class, we will just identify the magnoliids as we come to them. And you can presume that any flowering plant that is A, not a monocot, and B, not identified for you as either a magnoliid or a water lily, then that plant is probably going to be a eudicot.
Okay, so now we're at the very bottom of the horticulture complex, and I'm just going to put in a shameless plug for a project that I will be starting in the next year. I mean, it was supposed to be started in the summer of 2020, but then pandemic hit. We will be collaborating with UC Davis and the United States Department of Agriculture on a project, a 5-year project growing corn. Actually, it's a project that starts out with one highly genetically diverse strain of corn. Corn, maize, teosinte, basically what my colleague Jeff Ibarra, yeah, that's right, I'm Jeff Ihara, he's Jeff Ibarra, his name is Jeff Ross Ibarra from UC Davis. What he and collaborators have done is to generate a synthetic strain of Zea, which is the genus of grass that includes both corn, maize, and its ancestor teosinte. And starting with this incredibly genetically diverse stock, we're going to be growing the plants out and observing the changes that occur genomically as the plants adapt over 5 years to the conditions in Oceanside. Okay? Similar experiments are going to be done in various locations around the world. There are several sites in Spain, South America, Asia, across the United States. And so the neat thing about this is that we would be able to, look at patterns of evolutionary change starting from what is admittedly a very artificially diverse genetic stock. Right? I don't know if any experiments like this have been done in the past, but it seems like a very interesting and innovative thing for us to do, and it's a great honor for us to be able to participate in this study at MiraCosta College.
Okay, so now it's your turn. Put together a little plant walk video of your own and post it into the discussion board, just for the fun of it. No points, no penalty, just the normal credit that you get for contributing to the discussion board. If you have questions for the instructor, go ahead and pose them in your video. Maybe we can generate a class discussion, and that will benefit everyone by creating opportunities for active participation through their contributions and replies.